It was good use of your time. Last and probably least, I'm going to wrap this up with a group of questions. First of all, I'd like to let you know that we had 4 pages of questions with follow-ups, and we didn't get to them all. So we'll be sending those to each of you and asking you to respond for the record. But there are a number of things that I think, in summary, that I'd like to touch on. First of all, although this hearing was very much put out as relative to China, I think it's fair, and I just an acknowledgement from all of you, that there's no question at all that although China is the most unfair player, there are deep concerns on this panel about Britain, Germany, and the EU in general, and their desire to lower their cost of SEP licensing. Is that fair to say?
If I may, I'm not sure that I would characterize it that way exactly. I mean, I don't think, honestly, that the courts in these countries necessarily have an agenda. They have very different perspectives, and so the UK courts, probably the most similar to our own, I think take a fairly balanced approach to these issues. The German courts, as I've mentioned, see injunctive relief as a matter of right, and so that tends actually to give the SEP owners the advantage in those cases. That may change, as I mentioned in my written testimony. The European Commission may have other views on that, but remains to be seen.
Mr. Baker, that last point, if the whole world decided that SEP is great, but injunctive relief is essentially the default, how would that affect your ability to go to market?
It would effectively shut us down. The injunctions without first an analysis of whether or not an offer is friend, you can't determine if there's holdout. If you can't determine if there's holdout, why would you issue the injunction?
Okay. And the comment of diplomacy was used, and I appreciate that, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee. But let me characterize a question for a moment. The most valuable diplomacy the United States has is probably immersed over in the Department of Commerce, not the Department of State. Is it fair to say that China's unfair activities that have been outlined today and the Britain and others' desire to have their courts make global decisions, and this idea that you can be banned hypothetically from seeking any relief elsewhere, all of those would be offset by U.S. diplomacy that simply said, you want access to our market, those rules are not acceptable. Is that a fair approach for the new administration to look at, that access to our market is so valuable that all of these activities that we see as unfair should be negotiated in light of access to our economy? Anyone disagree with that, Dr. Copen?
Yeah, let me comment. I think these are very, very important points that you're raising, and I do believe that the process that the UK courts have utilized to be very thoughtful in their analysis actually provide a really positive example for the United States with the United Kingdom as a close ally and partner. So I think rather than—
Wait a second, you're saying that a federal judge, otherwise known as somebody who thinks he's God, should simply say, we're going to make a decision for the whole world, even though the Constitution gives him no such power, and that would be good if we mirrored what Britain has done, at least on a few occasions?
I'm talking about the thoughtful approach of coming to
my
judgment.
Article III judges are thoughtful. The question is more a matter of jurisdiction and sovereignty. So, you know, Mr. Baker, you've operated in all these areas. I know it's frustrating to have 200 countries, each of which asserts its own sovereignty, but is it fair to say that something between we'll make a decision for the world and then penalize you if you try to go to another country and seek remedy different there, and the idea that there's only one standard? That's really what global negotiations is about, is to try to cooperatively find it, not find it based on the decision of one judge, no matter how thoughtful.
Patents have regional boundaries. There's no doubt about that. A U.S. patent is valid in the U.S. and no place else. If there's going to be an exception to that rule relative to licensing, it either comes from the parties that say we agree to a global license coming out of a U.S. court, or it can be by the U.S. government, or through diplomacy, striking a negotiation where you find a broader than the regional application for a patent.
Now, there was one point brought up early on, and it was the fact that if I'm facing this, I love holding up my Chinese patent, it's small and worthless. But if I'm in a Chinese court, in 9 months, I'm going to be through my entire appeal process. Or is that not true, Mr. Cohen? If I'm in a Chinese court, but I'm an American patent holder, do I get done in 9 months? Or is that a one-way street currently?
By law, it's a one-way street, which is to say that the mandatory timeframes for civil litigation, including the appeal in China, do not apply if it's a foreign-related case. What is a foreign-related case is an undefined term, but I think your appearance from the United States in a Chinese court would clearly be a foreign-related case. So cases will get drawn out frequently because they're afraid of the diplomatic context, the political context, or perhaps for other reasons, but they do get drawn out for foreign.
So in closing, and there'll be a lot more questions that you've kindly said you'll answer for the record, if there was one thing in our dealing with China's access and China's implementation of their patents that you would want us to look at for next year would be, I guess it's two things. One is find a way to match that 9 months as best we can in the U.S. to bring some level of parity, if at all possible. And then secondly, and I know the ITC was mentioned, we'll leave that where it was for now, but secondly, deal with the lack of reciprocity in that, you said it very well, Mr. Cohen, in the U.S., we do not look at the country of origin in an Article III court case or even at the PTO, and China does. And if that continues, then we'll never really we'll get justice between the two. It'd be sort of like the old days with the Russian judges at the Olympics. Anyone see that as not one of the key areas that we have to work to change? Any last closing remarks from any of the panelists before I send you off with your homework in writing? With that,
I would
Yes.
just add that my comments today were for small and medium-sized companies that represent 90% of the companies that are building out IoT. They're not large companies, much as you started with your technology in Viper, and then it grew into a larger entity. That's the type of customer that we have. If you license us and there is a SEP-FRAND relationship that can be struck, you're licensing 2,000 people or 2,000 companies at a time that will never pay royalties to a major patent holder if you don't license through us. If you want to go to the end product, the money won't be there in a U.S. court to sue them, and you're leaving that money on the table.
If I may add.
That's not fair.
please.
And I really appreciate the opportunity to join with you today, the important focus on small and medium-sized enterprises as well, because these intellectual property enforceability issues are existential for these companies. The ability to continue to operate profitably on a global basis where we see an uneven playing field. The United States, as a free market economy, also has great benefits to lead the world by example and to take an approach that is not regulatory forward but enables the free market to really work and then to work diplomatically and to the point that was raised earlier with economic force to ensure that China does pay attention.
Thank you. Yes.
Just briefly, I would just urge the subcommittee to be mindful that whatever measures Congress may see fit to pass to strengthen patent rights, they may see that as a desirable thing to do to respond to China or to increase incentives for innovators. But be mindful that some of those provisions, some of those actions could potentially backfire against other U.S. companies that need access to technology, that should not be excluded from the market, that should not be threatened by patent assertion entities wrongly. And I think there needs to be a balance.
Thank you.